So just to go over our notes from the last session, in the last game, you finally figured out who poisoned the soup at the orientation dinner, and it was some upperclassmen, and although their behavior was innocuous, they did give you the kind of contact where they got the poison, and they thought, I mean, they didn't know that it was poison, they just assumed that it was going to upset people's stomachs, and they were trying to play a harmless prank. After that game, I let you know that you would have some time, some downtime to spend as you wanted, about a week, since as you got into the school, things just kind of went crazy all of the sudden. And some of you told me exactly what you wanted to do. So I know that some of you wanted to research the person, the contact you got for the poison, so we can start there. But Adam, you mentioned that you wanted to go to class? Like you actually wanted to, in D&D, you wanted to go to school? I mean, I guess. Welcome to class. I'm Trevor, and I post D&D videos every week on Wednesdays. In this video, I want to talk about Strixhaven's mechanics and how they can be used in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I've done a lot of these Strixhaven videos. I'll link a playlist somewhere. But in this one specifically, I wanted to talk about the major mechanics for Strixhaven and equating them to use in a 5e campaign. There was, right off the bat, one mechanic that I had to leave off, and that's the double-faced cards in Strixhaven. I cannot grok a way to make that work in 5th edition. I'll keep thinking about it, but it just doesn't, that seems more bespoke for a card game. When I think of any Magic set, I tend to think of the mechanics first, or at least early in my exploration. And in Strixhaven, the first mechanic that comes to my mind is lesson and learn. And for lesson and learn, I think the best way to do this is a downtime activity. If you're running a game on Strixhaven, there's a chance your players may want to go to class. And depending, you may want to run that as an actual encounter with roles for like performance or persuasion or whatever, depending on if they have to craft a potion or write a paper or perform a speech, whatever it might be. But there also might be times where they want to do more independent study, or you just don't want to run the class session as a normal encounter, and I think a downtime activity works perfectly well for that. So this gives a lot of flexibility to the players. Some of them could be doing this, while others could be doing other things. They could be playing Mage Tower, they could be just exploring the campus or socializing. There are a lot of other options besides just exploring class, so I don't want players to feel too pigeonholed. So just as an example, the 4 lessons that I used to kind of base this framework on were environmental sciences, expanded anatomy, introduction to annihilation, and introduction to prophecy. I left off the mascot one because it didn't seem as directly related to class, and I also think that this framework is just that. If you have a player who wants to go to more of a traditional like English class or potions class or something else, this can be modified and added to for other classes. The way that I decided this system would work is the player who is choosing to learn would roll a d20 and add a relevant modifier. I don't think this necessarily always needs to be intelligence. I think often it will be, but remember, there's also the option to use intelligence but proficiency in a different skill if it would be applicable. And on the chart that will be in the description, there's kind of tiers for what a player could earn based on how successful they are in their study. So let's just say, and the way that I would pitch this for my players, is I would say, here are your options, and if you want to go to a different class, then tell me, and I can make that up on the fly. But you can go to an environmental sciences class or a biology class, you can go to an anatomy class, you can go to, etc., right? Based on the 4 cards. And let's use expanded anatomy as an example. If they want to go to anatomy class, they would roll a d20, and maybe they would roll their, like a medicine check, because it's about like the way the body works and investigating a body. I think that could be reasonable. This is kind of like a skill challenge. As if you've followed these videos, you can see that I'm kind of a fan of those. So with expanded anatomy, the way that it works, and the way that all of these works, is there's 4 options depending on what they roll. So they start at DC 15, and then DC 20, and DC 25, and DC 30. So the lowest thing that they could get for choosing this as their downtime activity for expanded anatomy is no longer having advantage against them if they're being flanked. Now, this is obviously an optional rule in the player's handbook, so maybe this wouldn't exactly work, or you'd have to tweak it for like your campaign. But I wanted something that reflect being more like aware or alert and kind of aware of your physical space. And that to me, it also seemed to reflect the vigilance that is granted by the card in Magic. Now, I think the way that this works in my mind is that a player can kind of choose. They roll the d20, and let's say they roll a 25. If they want something from the earlier section of the chart, they could get that instead of the top end. Now, they do get stronger, but it really just depends on what the player is looking for. I wouldn't necessarily grant them multiple during one downtime session, because I think that might scale up players' power level a bit too quickly. So I would kind of try to keep that under control. But you can also choose how long it would take to do these things. It might be going to class once or once a week or for a semester or whatever. And that is very flexible based on how much downtime you're giving your players. The second ability that I talked about in the document is Magecraft. If you've played with the cards from Strixhaven, Magecraft is an ability that triggers when a spell is cast, an instant or sorcery specifically in Magic. The way that I kind of flavored this was I thought of Magecraft as a tag that items would have. So what I came up with was novice and advanced items that have Magecraft. And what this means is the novice items trigger when you cast a cantrip, and the advanced items trigger when you cast a leveled spell. Now, the advanced items are stronger. That just makes sense. And you could even tier this further and make advanced items that trigger when you cast a level, like a specific leveled spell, when you expend a third level spell slot or something, because then you can put even more powerful abilities behind it. So that's my thought process for Magecraft. It's really a tag that items specifically can have, and I think it's safest if the items that have these Magecraft triggers require attunement, because normally these effects are going to be powerful enough. Now, I guess that doesn't need to be the case, but I just think it's a little dangerous adding something on to, especially cantrips. If it doesn't require attunement, then I think it can stack pretty severely, and I worry that might get a little out of hand. And the last ability that I moved from Strixhaven to 5e is called Ward. Ward is a barrier or a difficulty in targeting someone with a spell. So I made Ward, and like it's clear in the article that like Wizards of the Coast designed Ward to be very flexible. So in the card game, Ward could be an additional cost that you have to, well, it's always an additional cost you have to pay, but it could be like additional mana, which is the resource in Magic, or it could be life. Those are the two biggest examples. But I'm sure there could be other things as well, like discarding a card or something like that. So I tried to mirror that in 5e. Not all Ward effects are going to be the same, but the end result will be the same. That targeting, you have to do something before you can target the person who has this ward, right? So if you're wearing a blood ward armor, then if someone's trying to charm you, they have to lose life. They have to roll a hit die and lose life in order for that charm to potentially happen. It doesn't automatically happen, but it's just it's something to kind of gatekeep or make it more difficult for you to be targeted by a spell. And Blood Ward is just one option. There are a couple of others that I included in the document. I made Ice or Time Ward, where you would have to give up part of your speed to target someone if they have that ward. There's Spell Ward, which would make, if you're trying to target someone with a leveled spell, you have to expend a higher level spell slot to do it. And I made Energy Ward, where you'd have to gain a level of exhaustion to target someone with something. Now, obviously these can scale pretty powerfully. Like that last one is really, really strong. Like as exhaustion scales up, there are pretty steep penalties for being exhausted. And that was intentional. I think some of these tags should only be on very powerful items, but like Blood Ward, I think is pretty reasonable. I think having to pay some life in order to target someone with something, I think that's kind of cool. And it adds another dimension other than just, oh, this person has advantage against magic, so I'm going to try to charm them, but I have disadvantage, or they have advantage on the save or whatever. Like, I get that system is baked into 5e for a reason, but I think that adding something that isn't exactly or isn't always advantage and disadvantage, I think that that can be fun as long as it doesn't get too out of hand. And I think with Ward it could work. I think it would be really dynamic to have a player who has like a Blood Ward chainmail, and they can still be targeted with spells. There's nothing preventing that, but it comes at a cost. And that seems really interesting. I hope that all of these kind of get that spirit of Strixhaven across in a game. That's one of my goals in this whole video series, is trying to flesh out as much of the universe as possible, so those of you who are playing in a Strixhaven campaign can feel real. There's that sense of verisimilitude, and that's, I don't know, there's some level that makes it a little bit more difficult to do that in a game that's based on a Magic plane, because we have expectations that are set by the card game, right? I know what it feels like to draft and play in Strixhaven, and I want that to come across in 5e. So if you end up using any of this, please drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear it if you have any ideas for different kind of wards or anything like that. I'm really interested. And if you wouldn't mind subscribing, I'd appreciate that as well. But as always, be safe. Make smart life choices.